The betrayal came from inside the wire. That's what makes this different. That's what makes this particularly concerning for military analysts. When American soldiers rolled out on what should have been just another routine patrol near Palmyra that December morning, they had no reason to suspect one of their supposed allies was about to turn his weapon against them. The man wore the right uniform. He carried the right credentials. He passed through the checkpoints, the security screenings, the trust-building exercises that are supposed to filter out threats. According to U.S. Central Command reports, at approximately 10 in the morning local time, at a fortified command post gate where Americans should have been safest, he opened fire. 2 soldiers from the Iowa National Guard were killed. A U.S. civilian interpreter working alongside them was also killed. 3 more Americans were wounded. And just like that, the fragile security arrangement in Syria revealed its vulnerabilities. Now here's where the response gets interesting, because what happened next wasn't some slow, bureaucratic process. Within hours, according to reports coming from the region, the sound barrier was breaking over Syrian desert. F-16 fighting Falcons and A-10 Thunderbolts converged on Palmyra from multiple directions, conducting shows of force at approximately 500 feet above the rooftops. If you were standing in that ancient city, the message was unmistakable. American air power was now focused on this region. These weren't training exercises. These weren't routine patrols. This was a deliberate demonstration of capability, and observers on the ground would have understood exactly what it signified. Let's rewind for a second, because you need to understand the complex situation that's been developing in Syria. After Assad left for Moscow, reportedly as part of an arrangement many analysts believe involved Russian assistance, Syria entered a transitional period. A new government stepped in, one that has publicly stated its intention to work with the West, one that has promised to fight ISIS alongside American forces. On paper, this represents progress. Here's the challenge. Their security forces are in the process of being restructured and vetted. Some members are committed to the new direction, some are evaluating their options, and some, according to intelligence assessments, maintain connections to extremist organizations. The shooter in Palmyra had reportedly been flagged for ISIS ties, yet he somehow maintained access to American positions. According to defense officials speaking to media outlets, this raises questions about systemic vulnerabilities that military planners are now reassessing. They called them green-on-blue attacks in Afghanistan, Afghan soldiers turning their weapons on the Americans training them. It happened repeatedly over the years, resulting in dozens of casualties, and it created an operational environment where trust became the scarcest resource. You couldn't fully trust the person standing next to you. You couldn't relax during joint patrols. Every interaction carried an element of calculated risk. That psychological dynamic affected operations in ways that went beyond the actual casualty numbers. Now, similar patterns are emerging in Syria, and Pentagon officials are acutely aware that if this trend isn't addressed immediately, American forces will be operating in an environment where every Syrian partner represents a potential security concern. That's operationally unsustainable. That's the kind of situation that fundamentally changes how missions are conducted. But let's examine what makes Palmyra such a challenging operational environment. Consider the geography of a city that served as a crossroads for empires across 2 millennia. The streets weren't designed for modern military vehicles. They wind through dense urban areas where potential ambush points exist at regular intervals. Ancient ruins provide numerous positions for observation or attack. The surrounding desert stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction, largely empty, difficult to monitor comprehensively. This represents what military planners would characterize as insurgent favorable terrain. ISIS leadership understands they cannot engage U.S. forces in conventional combat. That lesson was learned definitively when coalition forces dismantled their territorial holdings. So they've adapted their approach. They embed within civilian populations, they infiltrate security structures, they wait for opportunities, sometimes months or years, and then they strike for maximum psychological impact. The Palmyra attack, according to preliminary CENTCOM analysis, appears to follow this pattern. 3 Americans killed, 3 wounded, international media coverage, and immediate questions about mission sustainability. Military analysts observing the incident suggest this could represent the type of tactical outcome insurgent forces seek to achieve with minimal resources. Here's where American air power fundamentally alters the tactical equation. Those F-16s and A-10s appearing over Palmyra aren't simply flying intimidation missions, though they certainly serve that function. According to military sources, they're integrated into a sophisticated network connecting them directly to special operations forces on the ground. Green Berets from the 5th Special Forces Group are reportedly operating in that region. Marine raiders are embedded with Syrian partner forces. Joint Terminal Attack Controllers, the specialists who coordinate airstrikes, are scanning the area with advanced targeting equipment, feeding real-time intelligence to pilots orbiting overhead. This represents modern warfare operating at a level of coordination that insurgent forces struggle to comprehend, much less counter. When those jets conduct low passes at 500 feet, they're employing sensors capable of detecting heat signatures through building materials. They're mapping every structure, every vehicle, every person moving through the streets below. And if intelligence develops indicating a target, if authorization is granted, those aircraft can deliver precision munitions from significant distances. The F-16 and A-10 combination represents complementary capabilities that military planners have refined over decades. Consider how they function together. The F-16 operates at higher altitudes, typically 30 to 50,000 feet, maintaining invisibility to observers on the ground while monitoring everything through advanced targeting pods. It identifies patterns, tracks movements, feeds information to command centers analyzing the data in real time. When rapid response is required, when a target must be engaged before it disappears, the F-16 delivers precision-guided weapons with documented accuracy. But the A-10 brings different attributes to operations, and this is where the analysis gets particularly relevant for anyone examining close air support doctrine. The Warthog, as it's commonly known, flies low and relatively slow. Reports indicate operations at a few hundred feet altitude, speeds that allow pilots to visually confirm targets. This aircraft was fundamentally designed around a weapon system so substantial that the entire airframe essentially supports that gun. That 30mm rotary cannon fires depleted uranium rounds documented to defeat armored vehicles, and when it's employed, the acoustic signature alone affects decision-making on the ground. More significantly for sustained operations, the A-10 can maintain station for extended periods. While the F-16 requires regular aerial refueling to continue operations, the A-10's fuel consumption allows it to circle above operational areas for hours. And in an environment like Palmyra, where threats can materialize at any moment, having that persistent presence overhead represents the margin between manageable risk and critical vulnerability. When the shooting started at that command post gate, when those 2 soldiers from Iowa were killed and 3 more were hit, the immediate response involved returning fire, securing the perimeter, treating casualties. But within minutes, according to operational reports, someone was transmitting calls for air support, and within minutes more, jets were responding. That rapid response capability, that ability to surge overwhelming firepower into crisis zones faster than adversaries can adapt, significantly affects casualty rates in these environments. The wounded were evacuated by UH-60 Blackhawks, and this aspect deserves examination because it illustrates the layered support structure. Somewhere in the region, probably in Jordan or at a forward operating base near the border, helicopter crews were maintaining readiness, prepared to launch immediately upon notification. When the alert came, they initiated startup procedures and flew into what was technically still an active situation, where the shooter had been neutralized but additional threats remained possible. They landed, loaded casualties, and transported them to advanced medical facilities near the Syria-Iraq-Jordan border, all while operating under the awareness that ISIS elements could be observing, could be planning follow-up actions, could attempt to engage the aircraft. That level of commitment operates consistently in these theaters, and it's directly responsible for survival rates among wounded personnel. Meanwhile, intelligence analysts were already reconstructing the incident. The shooter was identified as a low-ranking member of Syria's internal security forces, but according to CENTCOM assessments, his ISIS connections appeared more substantial than his official position suggested. Intelligence evaluations indicate he was likely part of a sleeper cell operating in the region, one of potentially several that ISIS has maintained despite sustained military pressure. These cells don't require large numbers. A few dedicated operatives positioned strategically can generate disproportionate effects. And here's the concerning aspect from a counterintelligence perspective. There are likely additional individuals with similar profiles scattered throughout Syria's security apparatus. Identifying them, isolating them, that requires counterintelligence capabilities that Syria's new government may still be developing. The Americans understand this reality. That's why they're conducting independent vetting, independent background assessments, independent surveillance of Syrian partners. But the process is inherently imperfect. It will always carry risk. And until Syria can provide reliable assurance that their forces have been thoroughly screened, every joint operation includes this calculated vulnerability. President Trump's response, delivered publicly, vowed retaliation against ISIS and warned that future attacks would face overwhelming force. This aligns with established doctrine. When Americans are killed, responses are consistently designed to make the cost of attacking U.S. forces prohibitively high from an adversary's perspective. Special operations teams are reportedly conducting operations. Intelligence assets are being redirected, according to sources familiar with the situation. Surveillance systems are mapping ISIS networks, and those F-16s and A-10s overhead, reports indicate they'll maintain combat air patrols over American positions indefinitely, prepared to respond immediately if situations develop. Security analysts monitoring the situation note that ISIS operatives may have calculated that killing Americans would advance their objectives despite anticipated retaliation. The coming weeks will reveal whether that assessment proves accurate. The broader strategic picture adds complexity. Just weeks before the Palmyra attack, according to CENTCOM releases, U.S. and Syrian Democratic forces destroyed over 15 ISIS weapon caches in southern Syria. Mortars, rockets, improvised explosive devices, all eliminated in coordinated operations that were assessed as significantly degrading ISIS capabilities in the region. But instead of simply accepting those losses, what followed was an asymmetric attack of the type seen in Palmyra. Intelligence officials analyzing the timeline suggest this pattern could indicate ISIS elements prioritizing retaliation, which some analysts interpret as potential signs of desperation, narrowing options, or awareness that American forces are systematically dismantling their remaining networks. According to threat assessments circulating among military planners, sleeper cell attacks may represent one of their few remaining viable tactics, and current projections suggest they may continue employing this approach until circumstances change.
Geography determines much in this conflict. Palmyra sits amid extensive desert terrain, surrounded by empty landscape extending to every horizon. The nearest American installations are in Jordan, approximately a 10-minute flight in an F-16, potentially 20 minutes for the comparatively slower A-10. Turkey maintains NATO air bases that could launch reinforcements within an hour. Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, all host American air assets positioned for exactly these contingencies. Military observers note that the ability to project power across these distances, to surge aircraft into Syrian airspace from multiple vectors simultaneously, provides advantages that insurgent forces struggle to counter through conventional means. They can attempt to conceal themselves, they can blend into populations, they can infiltrate security forces. But according to defense technology assessments, they face significant challenges evading thermal imaging systems, satellite tracking of vehicle movements, or penetrating air defense networks maintained by coalition aircraft. The A-10's future has been debated in defense planning circles for years. Some analyses suggest it's becoming obsolete, that newer multi-role fighters can handle close air support more effectively. Events in Syria are providing data points for that debate. The A-10 brings capabilities that other platforms struggle to replicate. Its ability to loiter, to provide persistent coverage, to deliver substantial firepower in urban environments. These aren't theoretical advantages according to operational reports. They're affecting outcomes in current operations. The aircraft is even receiving upgrades, including laser-guided rocket pods specifically designed for counter-drone operations, a capability becoming increasingly relevant as Iranian-backed elements deploy unmanned systems throughout the region. Whether the A-10 remains in service long-term depends on numerous factors, but its performance in Syria is certainly informing those discussions. The mission in Syria has never followed a simple template. 900 American troops distributed across a country still establishing its governance structure, partnering with local forces of varying reliability, confronting an adversary that has mastered population integration tactics. It's the type of mission lacking clear completion criteria, obvious success metrics, and it carries persistent risk. The 2 soldiers from Iowa who died in Palmyra understood those risks, according to those who knew them. They accepted deployment to one of the most complex operational theaters because they believed in the mission's importance, because they understood that if ISIS is permitted to reconstitute in Syria, the threat eventually extends beyond regional boundaries. Think about the families in Iowa processing this loss right now. 2 soldiers who volunteered for service, who completed extensive training to deploy to one of the most challenging regions, gone in seconds because someone they were partnering with made a different choice. That represents the human cost that doesn't always receive proportionate attention and coverage. Behind every casualty report, there are families permanently affected. There are children whose lives are fundamentally altered. There are parents facing losses that contradict natural order. And the question becomes, what justifies that cost? According to official statements, stopping ISIS from regaining operational capability in Syria, preventing future terrorist attacks potentially targeting American interests, providing Syria an opportunity for stabilization after decades of authoritarian rule and civil conflict, those are the stated objectives. That's the justification for why those jets continue flying. That's why special operations teams continue operating. The air campaign over Syria right now represents something beyond simple retaliation for one incident, according to military analysts examining the response. It's demonstrating continued commitment, signaling to allies and adversaries that American resolve persists despite complexity, despite casualties, despite absence of clearly defined timelines. Those A-10 pilots conducting low passes over Palmyra, those F-16 crews maintaining round-the-clock combat air patrols, according to strategic assessments from defense experts, aren't exclusively protecting troops on the ground. They're defending interests in a region that's experienced instability across generations. Syria occupies geography connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Policy analysts note that developments there can generate effects extending outward in ways that aren't always immediately apparent. Intelligence reports from previous years have documented patterns where ISIS recruitment exploiting Syrian instability hasn't remained confined to Syria, but is manifested in attacks investigated in European cities. Defense officials indicate the mission continues because the alternative, withdrawing and permitting extremist elements to fill resulting vacuums, presents challenges that policymakers assess as potentially more costly. And let's examine what withdrawal scenarios have produced historically. When American forces departed Iraq, according to the timeline established, ISIS emerged from remnant al-Qaeda networks and established territorial control over areas comparable in size to some European nations. They conducted executions that were documented and broadcast. They implemented extreme interpretations of governance. They trafficked in enslaved persons. They transformed cities into zones of systematic violence. That's what occurs when extremist organizations are permitted to operate without sustained pressure, when safe havens develop, when international presence is withdrawn before local capacity is fully established. The 900 American troops currently in Syria represent what military planners characterize as a tripwire, preventing such scenarios from repeating. They're maintaining pressure that keeps ISIS fragmented, reactive, and unable to reconstitute into a territorial force they once represented. Every patrol, every partnership with local forces, every strike on weapons caches, according to CENTCOM assessments, contributes to cumulative pressure that ISIS cannot sustain indefinitely. The lessons from Palmyra are already influencing how American forces operate throughout Syria and likely across the broader region. Enhanced vetting procedures for local partners are being implemented, according to defense officials. New protocols for joint operations are being developed. The parameters regarding who can access American positions, who can carry weapons near coalition locations, all of that is being re-evaluated based on this incident. It represents learning purchased at terrible cost, but military planners view it as necessary if future attacks are to be prevented. The jets remain overhead. The response continues. Now comes the sustained effort, ensuring it doesn't happen again.